Florida, a place known for its beaches, theme parks, and sunshine. But beneath all that, there's a different side, a darker one. Deep inside Florida's prison system, back in 1986, a gang called Unforgiven was born, and they didn't come to play. From the jump, Unforgiven wasn't just another prison gang. They were the most powerful white supremacist crew in the state. Yeah, they started behind bars, but they weren't about to stay there. These dudes had bigger plans, pushing their reach way past prison walls. It wasn't just about surviving inside. It was about running things, stacking numbers, claiming territory, and making sure their name held weight on both sides of the gate. And they did it all under the flag of white supremacy, pushing their hate while hiding behind a so-called political movement called Route 21. That was their mask, their way of looking legit. But strip it down, and it was all about one thing: spreading their racist agenda. Joining wasn't just about claiming the name. If you wanted in, you had to prove yourself. It wasn't enough to just believe in their cause. You had to prove yourself through violence. The more brutal, the better. And once you were in, breaking their rules wasn't an option. They made it clear. Anyone who stepped out of line would face the harshest punishment possible. Studying and spreading Aryan beliefs was a must. Paying dues wasn't just about money. It was loyalty, commitment, and sometimes blood. Violence was part of the package, and if you weren't willing to put in work, you weren't staying in. That's what made them so dangerous. This wasn't just a gang, it was a movement creeping through Florida's communities, infecting more than just the prison system. But they weren't just pushing ideas. They had a whole operation running, moving weapons, drugs, and anything else that kept the money flowing. Sticking together was a rule, and they took it to the extreme. They saw themselves as warriors rebelling against what they claimed was the brutal victimization of white inmates. That belief fueled everything they did, and they didn't just rely on muscle, they were smart about it too. They had connections, dirty cops, crooked state workers, feeding them intel. They knew when their people were getting investigated, who was about to get charged, and how to stay one step ahead. They even found ways to smuggle things inside for their brothers still locked up. Now, Unforgiven doesn't show up on the Southern Poverty Law Center's list of 14 hate groups in Florida, but the Anti-Defamation League knows exactly who they are, a white supremacist gang. And if you look at their symbols, it's not hard to see why. Their main emblem, an iron cross and a swastika tangled together with SS lightning bolts ripping through the middle. Just about every major Nazi symbol you can think of, they've got it. And they don't just throw up symbols. They've got a whole number code too, the 21st of February 12. Flip those into letters and you get U for unity, B for brotherhood, and L for loyalty. That's their stamp, just like the tattoos they rock. Because being an Unforgiven ain't just about signing up, it's about proving you're down. They ink themselves with white supremacist symbols and make sure they show up for meetings. At these meetings, they handle business. Who's in, who's out, and who's got a target on their back. But it's not just face-to-face sit-downs. The Unforgiven Council kept things moving on the messaging app, Marco Polo, using it to vote on violations, plan attacks, and keep everyone in line. One of those violations, a patch taking. If you were out, the gang made sure you weren't walking around repping their ink. On January 19, 2019, Maverick Maher, who also went by Saxon, took that rule into his own hands. He held another member, CL, against his will and forced a brutal cover-up job on his tattoos. Maher didn't just oversee it, he literally sat on CL while he tattooed over the symbols himself, making sure the old markings were wiped out for good. And he wasn't done. Maher wasn't just part of the action, he was helping plan it, maybe even calling the shots. Fast forward to July 2020, and a group of Unforgiven members attacked a guy named CS in Lake City, Florida. They pistol whipped him with a shotgun, then cut into his back to destroy his patch. The wildest part? That hit was greenlit at a church meeting in Satsuma, Florida. Maher sent those guys straight from the church to carry out the hit. Then came WH, another Unforgiven member who found himself on the wrong side of the gang. In June 2020, they stormed into his living room in Pasco County and jumped him right there in his own home. Same story as the others. Beat him down, made him cover up his Unforgiven tattoos. November 2019 was more of the same. Scott Marshall and 2 other Unforgiven members lured a guy named RS to a house in Pasco County. Once they had him there, he wasn't leaving. Not until they finished what they came to do. They held him against his will and forced him to cover up his Unforgiven ink. And if that wasn't enough, they even filmed parts of the attack and shared it with the rest of the gang on Marco Polo. That Marco Polo app wasn't just for casual conversation. Maher and his crew used it to coordinate attacks, not just on Unforgiven members who fell out of favor, but also on people they called gray boys and race traitors. In their world, if you didn't show Unforgiven the respect they thought it deserved, you were a target. And to rise in a gang like that, it takes a certain kind of man. And for Tindle Williams, he was built for it from the start. Now, Tindle Jason Williams had been getting into trouble for as long as anyone could remember. His father had raised him for a while, but when Williams started acting out, he was sent to live with his mother. What happened after that wasn't exactly clear. His mother, Nikki Hughes, never spoke about it, but one thing was certain. Williams' life kept spiraling in the wrong direction. Even before turning 11, the state had already labeled him as beyond control. He never even made it through 8th grade, and by the time he was a teenager, he was running the streets. His relationship with his father had all but disappeared, and the last time they had seen each other was sometime around Christmas of 1997. After that, his father vanished from his life. By the time Williams was 17, he had racked up at least a dozen run-ins with the police. Some were minor, like vandalism, but others were far more serious. Grand theft auto, burglary, assault. At some point, he picked up the nickname Popeye, along with a small teardrop tattoo under his left eye. He eventually joined a violent gang known as the Sick Boys, and before he even hit 20, he was already serving time in prison. Williams's 2-year prison sentence stemmed from one wild night when he went on a crime spree that sounded like something out of a movie. At just 16, he stole 3 cars, led Castleberry police on a chase, crashed a brand new Corvette, and once they had him in custody, even tried to break out of a holding cell. That night, according to police records, no one could even find his parents. But while Williams was growing up in chaos, Tony Francis was living a completely different life, though it wasn't without its struggles. Born and raised in Bombay, India, Francis grew up in a home that didn't have much, but what they lacked in money, they made up for in faith. His family relied on their strong Christian values to get them through hard times. From a young age, Francis had a soft heart. By 11, he was already bringing home injured animals, birds, cats, puppies, nursing them back to health as if it was his personal mission. He carried that same kindness into adulthood, becoming the kind of person who made everyone feel like they mattered. At the Citgo Quick Stop, where he worked long hours, sometimes 70 a week, Francis became a local favorite. He had a way of remembering every customer's name, making everyone who walked through the door feel like a friend. His green Mitsubishi Eclipse sat in the parking lot like a familiar landmark, a sign that stepping inside meant leaving worries behind. And if someone caught a whiff of that Paco Rabanne cologne he always wore, they knew they were in good company. For Francis, life wasn't about personal success. It was about making life better for others. Nearly every dollar he earned went straight back home to Bombay, making sure his family could get by. He lived simply, uninterested in luxuries, with just one decoration in his apartment, a framed picture of the Last Supper, 2 men, 2 entirely different paths. And yet, their lives would cross at a small red brick convenience store, tucked in the middle of a working-class neighborhood on West Church Avenue in Longwood. Francis worked at the store, and if you'd asked him, he probably would have told you that some things were just meant to be. To him, fate wasn't just an idea, it was a fact of life. That belief made it easy for him to go with the flow, though it sometimes unsettled his roommate, especially when Francis would offhandedly mention that he didn't see himself sticking around for more than another 10 or 20 years. Then on June 23rd at exactly 9:44 p.m., fate walked right through the door. The security footage from that night is grainy, but what it shows is clear enough. A cold-blooded killing. A man burst into the store, and before Francis even has time to register what's happening, A sawed-off shotgun fires. The blast hits him square in the chest. The police say the man who pulled the trigger was Williams. According to the Longwood police, Williams had been to that store before, and there's a good chance Francis knew him. Maybe he had even cashed one of Williams's paychecks for him. But it wasn't just that connection that led the police to their suspect. It was an ex-girlfriend who helped them put the pieces together. Her name was Christine Kronk, and when she heard about the shooting, she called the police. She told them she had argued with Williams earlier that day. He had promised to pay back the money he stole to buy drugs, and during that conversation, he mentioned having his mom's 12-gauge shotgun. The autopsy confirmed what everyone already suspected. Francis died from a shotgun wound. The police never recovered the weapon, but they started searching a small pond about a mile from the store, hoping to find something. The day after the shooting, Kronk told the police that Williams had called her and told her to watch the local news. They were showing images from the store's security footage. And then, according to the police report, he asked her a strange question. If she didn't already know who it was in the video, would she still recognize him? The next day, he was arrested. Williams refused to speak to anyone about the case. His father said he was in complete shock that his son had been taken into custody. As for Francis's father, anger wasn't his reaction. He said his faith told him that judgment wasn't his to make. His only response to the man accused of killing his son was that he would pray for him, because in the end, God would be the one to deliver justice. Francis's sister Devamani had a different take. She said it wasn't her place to judge or forgive. That decision belonged to her brother. And if it were up to him, she was sure he would have forgiven Williams. Williams was sentenced to life in prison for the murder. That might have been where his story ended, but instead, prison became the next chapter. It didn't take long for Williams to become a leader within the Unforgiven gang. And it wasn't just about power. Violence followed him. At the state prison near Daytona Beach, he was charged with attempted murder after an attack on another inmate, Esteban Quintanal. Quintanal was 57 years old and serving a 27-year sentence for killing a South Florida police officer back in 1992. But inside the prison, he had a reputation for something else, giving authorities information about other inmates. That made him a target. Williams wasn't alone in the attack. Reports say he and 5 others, all suspected of being connected to white supremacist groups, had been smuggling drugs and cell phones into the prison to sell. When they found out about Quintanal's cooperation with authorities, they decided to send a message. They waited for him during dinner. Williams led the attack, ambushing Quintanal in his cell. Jimmy Cochran and Brian Carricker stood watch, while Williams, Everett Leon Nichols, and William E. Bowers used homemade knives, shanks, to stab Quintanal 17 times. Quintanal survived. He was left with a neck injury and had to be transferred to a different prison for treatment, but he recovered. As for Williams and the others, they were moved to the Volusia County Branch Jail, locked away once again, this time under even closer watch. Now get this, almost everyone in the Unforgiven joined while they were behind bars, and that leads us to the biggest name connected to the group, though he might not even be a member, Wade Wilson. Hear his name and you probably think of Deadpool, right? But this guy, he's no superhero. He's the kind of killer that sends chills down the spines of true crime fans. A man who carried out 2 brutal, calculated murders in a single day and had the audacity to brag about using his charm to lure his victims in. And if the Deadpool connection wasn't creepy enough, his facial tattoos gave off a serious Joker vibe, making him even more unsettling. It all went down on October 7th, 2019. Wilson was out at a bar in Fort Myers called Buddha Live, where he met 35-year-old Christine Melton and her friend Stephanie Sailors. They were just out having a good time, drinking, talking, and when the bar shut down, the night wasn't over. The 3 of them ended up at Jason Shepard's place, hanging out for hours before finally heading out in the morning. Wilson, Melton, and Sailors made their way back to Melton's home in Cape Coral. At some point, Sailors left, and that's when things turned deadly. While Melton was asleep in her bed, Wilson strangled her to death. Then, without hesitation, he took her car and left like nothing had happened. Not long after, Wilson was driving through Cape Coral when he saw 43-year-old Diane Ruiz walking to work. She was heading to the Moose Lodge, where she'd never missed a single shift in 5 years. Reliable, dedicated, but that morning she never made it. Wilson pulled up and asked her for directions to a nearby school. That was his end. Somehow, he got her into the car. But when Ruiz realized something was off and tried to get out, Wilson attacked. He beat her, strangled her, then pushed her out onto the ground. And as if that wasn't cruel enough, he ran her over again and again, somewhere between 10 and 20 times. Her body was found 3 days later in the field. Wilson was spiraling, and after the murders, he kept blowing up his biological father's phone. He wasn't just calling to vent, he was confessing, every disturbing detail spilling right out of his mouth. Stephen Testaseca, his father, listened as Wilson admitted to choking Melton after she fell asleep. Then came Ruiz. Wilson had stopped her for directions before letting her get in the car. But once she was inside, he choked her while driving. At first, nobody really took Wilson seriously. They figured he was just running his mouth, telling wild stories like he always did. But then, Testaseca put the phone on speaker and his wife heard everything. That's when things got real. She quietly passed all that info straight to the police. Testaseca played it smart. Instead of panicking, he kept Wilson talking, asking where he was and telling him he'd send an Uber. But there was never an Uber. Instead, he sent Wilson's location straight to the cops. On October 8th, 2019, they found Wilson hiding out in some empty house he had broken into. That's where it all ended for him. When Wilson's trial rolled around, the jury had two options: life without parole or the death penalty. In Florida, a death sentence doesn't need a unanimous vote. Just 8 jurors have to agree. For Melton, the jury went 9, 3 for death. Ruiz, even stronger at 10, 2. Judge Thompson made it official, and Wilson ended up with 2 death sentences. However, in September 2020, Wade Wilson's name really started buzzing when he and his cellmate tried to break out of Lee County Jail. And this wasn't some sloppy, spur-of-the-moment thing. Wilson was the brains behind it. He mapped out the plan, kicked off the escape, and even tried to line up a getaway car. When deputies searched the 10x10 cell, they found clear signs Wilson had tried to break out. The metal frame around the window was gone, and the thick security glass was cracked all over. He got hit with charges for the escape attempt and the damage, but later, those charges got dropped as part of a deal tied to a substance case. But that case uncovered something way bigger than just a busted window. Court records linked Wilson to the Unforgiven. His connection came through another inmate, Lauren Curtis Sawyer, raising serious questions. Just how deep was Wilson in this? And did those beliefs play a role in his crimes? If his tattoos were any indication, the answer wasn't pretty. He had a swastika on the right side of his head and another one just below his right eye. That symbol, adopted by Hitler's Nazi Party in 1920, became the most notorious emblem of hate and white supremacy after World War II. But despite the court records tying Wilson to the Unforgiven, some experts weren't convinced. Christopher Magyarix, a researcher with the Anti-Defamation League, told Newsweek that none of Wilson's visible tattoos specifically pointed to the Unforgiven, but that didn't mean they weren't white supremacist in nature. Take the number 14 on the right side of his neck. That's a well-known reference to the 14 words. We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. Then there was the 88 inked on the left, a common shorthand for Heil Hitler, since H is the 8th letter of the alphabet. Together, 1488 is a number often linked to white supremacist movements. So was he deeply involved with the Unforgiven? Maybe, maybe not. But between his past, his choices, and the marks on his skin, one thing was certain. He was a man with ties to a dangerous and deeply troubling ideology. Appreciate you watching. If you liked it, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more.